His chief concern is the enforcement of his particular religious views on the rest of us with our tax dollars.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I want to highlight how right-wing media is totally just totally hypocritical in the way that they present these things. And so, as we all know, Roe v. Wade has been overturned, criminalizing abortion in the state of Alabama because of our trigger law, making it now the policy of the state that a minority of our citizens get to enforce their religious views on the bodies of all citizens, even up to the point of mandating at the point of a gun, as small government weirdos like to say, that a child carry the pregnancy of their father's rape to term. That's how far they're willing to go to push their religious beliefs on the rest of us. That's the policy. That is the official policy of the state of Alabama. And as politicians have been pressed on this, they have... Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth has said he supports the law that is on the books. The sponsor of the original legislation said that she's, quote, just listening right now. Others have said they'll take a second look, but what's going to happen is they're not going to revise it. There is no way, because they would get eaten alive by the insane Theocrats that make up a powerful portion of their base, but still a minority of Alabama. And just think about what that means about who is running the party, the Republican Party, that to loosen up the law, just that you have a symbolic exception for rape and incest, that just that you would be thrown to the wolves, and people are scared to do it. You know, I mean, if they weren't scared to do it, then people would be saying, oh, yeah, well, obviously we're going to change this law now that it's actually in effect. But the reason that they're not saying that, the reason that they are either saying I support the law as it is, or I'm just listening, or we need to take a second look at it, is because they're scared. They are scared that if they say, I don't think a 10-year-old should have to carry their uncle's rape pregnancy to term, that they would get primaried by somebody even more crazy. That's why. That's the politics that are at play here. So one final line of defense, though, that the state of Alabama has, that the citizens of the state of Alabama has, is electing district attorneys that will refuse to prosecute and enforce this tyrannical law, which is the entire reason that district attorneys are elected, right? I mean, it gives citizens discretion over enforcement priorities. Of course, that defense is not foolproof. A state attorney general could pick up where a DA leaves the case on the ground. I believe that's the case. But nevertheless, that's the purpose of a district attorney. Otherwise, district attorneys would simply be unelected civil service positions. You know, I mean, a Social Security agency computer worker, they don't have discretion over enforcement priorities. And thus, they're not elected. They're just civil service positions. And they just do the law as it's written. But district attorneys are elected so that we can have a say over how our laws are enforced. And that is exactly what Jefferson County District Attorney Danny Carr has rightfully pledged he would do, and what the Mobile County District Attorney Moshe Donald has hinted at. And this has sent some Theocrats into a tizzy, and instead of arguing against this position and trying to get a Theocrat district attorney into these positions that will prosecute, according to the law, a 12-year-old child who doesn't want to carry her uncle's rape pregnancy to term, they're just lying to you. They're just lying to you. Matt Clark wrote for propaganda outlet 1819 News, who interviewed a flat earth pro-military coup candidate for governor, without mentioning that, who right before the crypto crash, where working people who were scammed into putting inordinate sums of money into Bitcoin lost thousands of dollars, upwards of 50% of the value that they invested. Right before that, they allowed a scam artist and CEO or something of Crypto Y'all, which is a Southern crypto education nonprofit, to try to get gullible folks to buy in so he could make a profit. That's who 1819 News is. Matt Clark, and just one more thing. Where do they find these people? Matt Clark, who the hell is this guy? Matt Clark. I know that the people that fund these places like 1819 News have basically unlimited resources, but you would think they would want to diversify somehow instead of hiring dozens of random conservative white guys to say the same thing in columns and on radio microphones over and over and over and over. And I'm not talking about diversity in terms of, black or white or gay or straight. I'm talking about media diversity, because you would just think that there would be a different the position of angry conservative guy on the radio and angry conservative guy in opinion column in the state of Alabama is well covered. The bases are covered. Let's try something else. That's all I'm saying. Anyways, Matt Clark had this to say in propaganda outlet 1819 News. Quote, "District attorneys literally have one job: protecting innocent people by prosecuting criminals. As the popular saying goes, you had one job. Seriously, it's what you were elected to do. So what's the problem?" Now, he does make one concession to reality. He said it is well settled that prosecutors do have some discretion on how they handle cases, and they can even decline to prosecute people sometimes. And so there you go. That's the whole thing. And so why does the article not end? Well, this is why it doesn't end. He crafts a very narrow view of what discretion district attorneys have. Quote, "There are two factors that go into a legitimate decision." Who is defining legitimate here? There are two factors that go into a legitimate decision by a prosecutor not to prosecute. First, if the law is unclear, the prosecutor necessarily has to use his discretion on how to proceed. That leaves one other factor that really gets to the heart of the matter. A prosecutor can decline to prosecute when doing so would be fundamentally unjust. And now, I don't know where he gets these two restrictions on the discretion. I don't know where he's pulling this from, if this is something that's written in his Bible or something that is actually in the Alabama Code. But let's take them at face value and just say that these are legitimate barriers on the use of discretion by district attorneys. It's obviously fundamentally unjust, and this is the view of the district attorney. It is fundamentally unjust to impose the religious views of a minority, even if it's a majority, but it is a minority of people, on others, which is exactly what the revocation of abortion rights does, in which he cannot even hide in his argument for this position. He cannot hide that this is religiously motivated. Quote, from his article, "God has told us in writing, 'You shall not murder.' It is such an obvious truth that civilizations across the globe for millennia have all been able to agree that murder is wrong. There is nothing more unjust than the mass murder of innocent people, which is exactly what Carr wants to protect." End quote. He cannot argue for the right to abortion to be stripped from people without his religion, because that's the crux of the thing. That is the crux of the thing. There is no legitimate, there's nothing legitimate that you can say to support forcing birth on people without your religion. That's all it is. And it doesn't matter what your religion says. You can't impose that on other people.
Well, you can. It's just that you shouldn't.
You shouldn't.
And it's a shame that we're moving backwards in that respect.
Very, very bad. Very bad. But, on the discretion, like this exposes the lie, right? You listener, you viewer, should call up here's the challenge that proves his lie. Call up your local district attorney and ask them how much time and money is dedicated to combating wage theft. Ask him that. Ask Matt Clark that. Ask him how much he thinks his district attorney, how much money is being allotted to combating wage theft. Because we know here on this show that actually much more money is stolen from workers via wage theft than all other property crime combined. Look it up. And yet, most district attorneys, including, I would hazard a guess, Danny Carr, most district attorneys dedicate $0 to solving this massive criminal redistribution of wealth from working people to the rich.
And here's just some numbers for you from the Economic Policy Institute showing that wage theft is a much bigger problem than robbery. It's roughly triple the amount.
Yeah, I've got a graphic up. Pull that up.
Well, graphic's not up for some reason. That's why I was kind of going over it a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, according to the Economic Policy Institute, now this is from a few years ago, so I'm sure the data has changed a little bit, but probably only gotten worse, I would imagine.
Right.
But there was about $933 million in wage theft compared to about $341 million in robberies. So, again, we're talking about 3 times as much money is stolen via wage theft than your run-of-the-mill robberies that folks, want you to panic over.
Right. Exactly. If district attorneys were really meant to be automatons, then they would be spending actually more resources fighting wage theft than any other property crime. Wage theft, under his definitions, wage theft is totally clear in the law. Workers are owed what they are promised, and it is not unjust to enforce that law. Nobody would argue that it is unclear whether or not workers are owed what they are promised. And nobody would argue that it is unjust, I mean, at least not in public, I don't think. Nobody would argue that it is unjust to enforce that law that says workers are owed what they are promised. And yet, district attorneys never, ever, ever do that. And Matthew from 1819 News is not writing wailing editorials about this. Because his chief concern is not a neutral enforcement of the law. He could care less about that. He could care less.
If such a thing even exists.
Right. He could care less about that. His chief concern is the enforcement of his particular religious views on the rest of us with our tax dollars. That's what he cares about. That's what he wants.
Right. And I think that's really the gist of a lot of contemporary right-wing ideology is to finance private ideology via public taxes.
Right.
Like the public does not matter except for as a means to profit and to instill their own private ideas. Public institutions are there to be stripped down, sold off for parts, privatized, outsourced. But we'll take your tax dollars. Right. We'll take your tax dollars. We'll give more money to the police. We'll use your funds to enforce our narrow ideologies on the rest of us.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.